No matter how incredible life may seem, it constantly gives us signs and hints that we just need to pay attention to and analyze. At some point, my life started going downhill, and I thought I was doomed. But these difficulties helped me realize one thing: my wife is cheating on me. I decided to take action. It was a typical Wednesday morning. I got up and prepared to go to work while my wife, Beth, with whom I've been married for 5 years, enjoyed a little more sleep before having to wake up and get the kids ready. I work for a respectable accounting firm with about 100 employees located in Ontario. Meanwhile, my wife is a manager at a retail store. I follow the conventional 9-to-5 schedule, while she works evening shifts managing a women's clothing store until closing. Although it's a challenge since we only have 2 nights together with our kids during the week, this arrangement seems to work well for us. On weekdays, she takes the kids to daycare, and I pick them up on my way home from work. To keep our daycare spot, we pay for all 5 days, which leads to a routine where she stays with the kids on one of her weekdays off and handles family errands on the other day while the kids are at daycare. In a few more years, she should qualify for a promotion to area manager, which will involve travel but also offer more flexibility in her work hours. This means we'll likely be able to have dinner together most nights. Beth has just returned from maternity leave, so we're just settling into a routine with our 1-year-old son, George, and our 3-year-old daughter, Belinda. Today was one of her days off. We're renting an apartment, but once things stabilize, we'll start looking for a house. Overall, things are going well. It's not perfect, but we're adapting to the schedules dictated by our careers. We knew this would be the case when we decided to start a family. While I was driving into the parking lot, I heard someone call my name, Francis. Good morning. Turning around, I saw my friend Jerry, whom I've known since the first week of college when we both tried to win over the same girl at an ice week party. Good morning, Jerry, I greeted him. Did you hear about any important meeting today? I had to leave early yesterday. No, he replied, but I'm sure we'll get the details this morning. You know how the boss likes to give those early announcements to get everyone pumped up. He gave me a friendly pat on the shoulder as we walked inside. I got to my desk and started working on the day's tasks. Suddenly, an unexpected invitation interrupted our routine, leading to an urgent meeting in several conference rooms. On my way to the assigned meeting, I ran into Jerry, who was supposed to attend a different session but opted to join me. Suspicion arose when attendance was being registered at the entrance of each room, and Jerry was redirected to his original location. Inside our meeting room, 12 of us waited for the arrival of the company president and the HR manager. The tension was palpable as we exchanged nervous glances. The president began solemnly, "Unfortunately, I bring bad news. We've lost the Henderson Group contract. As members of that team, you are all affected. For some of you, today is your last day with us, others will remain during the transition period. I'm sorry about the situation." After that, my mind went blank. Lisa, the HR manager, proceeded to hand out our severance packages. I was clear-headed enough to realize that today was my last day. We were instructed to return home and review the contents of our packages. We would later be scheduled to return to the office to collect personal items from our desks. "Francis, I'm sorry, but it's time to go," Lisa touched my shoulder. I simply nodded and got up from my seat, still stunned by the announcement. As we were escorted out of the building, someone had gathered our coats and bags from our desks and handed them to us as we exited. Sitting in my car, reality hit me hard. Tears streamed down my face as I thought about Beth just returning from maternity leave. How would we manage this? After about 10 minutes, I calmed down. The last thing I needed was to get into a car accident on top of everything else. Looking around, I saw others still sitting in their cars. Yes, my team leader caught my eye. Her makeup was streaked with tears, speaking volumes on its own. I offered her a sympathetic gesture before driving home. When I entered the house, Beth appeared from around the corner and asked, "Francis, why are you home?" I was all I could manage before collapsing onto the sofa. She joined me, and I began, "You know I was working on the Henderson account?" She nodded. "Well, the firm lost it, and I've been laid off." Tears welled up again. "Is it temporary?" she asked. "No, it's permanent. They sent me home with paperwork to review." I expected a comforting hug and some encouraging words like, "What are we going to do?" Instead, she leaned back in her chair with a mix of anger and disappointment, the look she gives when plans fall apart. I ended up hugging her, murmuring, "Don't worry, we'll get through this." I got up from my seat, picked up the packet of documents, and headed to my home office to review them thoroughly. While absorbed in the papers, I caught snippets of Bet's phone conversation. Though the dialogue was a bit muffled, I managed to pick up fragments like, "We have to cancel and I don't know when." After a moment of silence, I called out, "Hey, who were you talking to, honey?" Bet replied, "It was the neighbor. She mentioned bringing the kids over for a playdate, but I told her we had to cancel." Strange, I thought, not recalling any prior mention of plans with the neighbor. Besides, our kids were much younger than hers, so a playdate wouldn't have been a big deal anyway. Returning my focus to the papers, I tried to figure out our current situation. With 6 years at the firm, I was granted 2 weeks' pay for each year worked, totaling about 3 months of compensation. At least for the immediate future, we were financially stable. I quickly pulled out my resume, recognizing the urgency of the situation. Over the next hour, I updated it diligently, staying focused. My plan was to have it ready by lunchtime and then dive into the job search in the afternoon. Bet came in a couple of times, her expression still marked by anxiety. I reassured her about the 3 months of severance pay and our prospects. Around lunchtime, Jerry called to check on how I was doing. "I'm doing the best I can, given the circumstances," I replied. "How is Bet handling it?" he asked. "Not as I expected. Instead of being worried, she seems more inconvenienced, like I'm disrupting her plans. That's probably uncharted territory for both of you." "She'll adjust," Jerry offered. "You're probably right," I agreed. "Let's catch up once everything is sorted." "That sounds like a plan," he agreed. After lunch, I browsed several job websites and found about 6 job opportunities worth applying to. I spent the rest of the afternoon drafting tailored cover letters and refining my resume for each position before submitting my applications. Now, all that was left to do was wait. Dinner passed relatively quietly until Belinda decided to lift our spirits, and we all laughed heartily. We were determined to keep our daycare spot and stick to the kids' regular routine, so they attended daycare on their usual days. However, Bet decided to playfully flirt before leaving for work. I hadn't noticed this side of her before, but with our busy work schedules and the recent birth of our second child, our intimacy had reduced to about once a week, and to be honest, it wasn't particularly exciting. We were usually too exhausted. However, on the first day she was completely off work, after dropping the kids off at kindergarten, she surprised me by dressing provocatively and leading me to the bedroom. We were close for about an hour until she had to leave for work. We used protection because we weren't sure if we wanted a third child, and Bet always experienced side effects when she took birth control pills, so she avoided them until we were certain of our decision. While lying in bed afterward, I asked her what had prompted this sudden affection. "I thought you might need some help," she responded with a smile, kissing me. I certainly wasn't going to complain. As soon as she left, I resumed my job search. That was my main focus now. After a couple of weeks, the only silver lining was our improved intimacy. I was the least experienced among the 6 others who had been laid off, and with the economy in decline, despite attending several interviews, none resulted in a job offer. Then, I received news from another company, and they scheduled an interview for the next day. I called Bet at work to inform her, and she confidently affirmed that this opportunity would come through. She just knew it. The interview was scheduled for early in the morning, as the job was in Kitchener, and I had a half-hour drive ahead. I felt confident about how the interview went and was optimistic about my chances. They mentioned they had a few more candidates to interview and would inform me of their decision next week. I arrived home feeling excited, but Bet met me at the door, looking puzzled. "How did it go?" she asked. It wasn't so much her words as her overall attitude. She had that familiar satisfied look she usually wore after we'd been intimate, though we hadn't been today. I suppose my expression gave something away. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Oh, nothing," I quickly recovered. "I was just reflecting on one of the questions they asked." "Well, I'm sure you did well," she reassured me, hugging me. That was another anomaly. I caught the scent of her hair. Normally, she showered right before going to work, which was an hour away, but she had already showered. Something wasn't adding up. Beth didn't initiate intimacy with me in the following days. It seemed like she had satisfied some craving and didn't need another dose for the time being. While waiting for the outcome of my recent interview, another company from Kitchener contacted me and scheduled yet another interview for the next morning. Beth was scheduled to work again today, so after my shower, I discreetly placed a hair in her shampoo bottle. Feeling inspired, I did the same in my own shampoo bottle, making sure it wouldn't get wet. If Beth decided to shower, I'd know. I took a picture of the setup to compare later. Beth gave me a good luck kiss, and then I left. Despite my best efforts to stay focused, I felt that the interview went well. However, the interviewer didn't share the same enthusiasm. She candidly mentioned that my experience, primarily focused on a single client over the last 6 years, lacked the breadth she was looking for. Nonetheless, she expressed that she liked me and promised to keep me in mind for future opportunities. The drive home wasn't joyful. Although it hadn't been long since my layoff, I had expected more interviews and positive responses. The disappointment deepened when my previous employer called to inform me that I wasn't being rehired, without offering much of an explanation. I thanked them politely and ended the call, feeling as though I was failing, with no successes to show for my efforts so far. I arrived home to find Beth in the same state as after the previous interview, wearing that freshly satisfied look. Despite my frustration, sharing the disappointing news of today's interview didn't seem to affect her mood. She excused herself. It was clear now, she had been unfaithful. Taking a deep breath, I sat down on the toilet, contemplating what else could go wrong in my life. After about 10 minutes, Beth knocked on the door. "Are you okay, honey?" she asked. "One moment," I responded. When I opened the door, she seemed genuinely concerned for me, though my distress was about more than just a job search. She hugged me. "We'll get through this. It's only been a few weeks. Keep applying, and something will work out," she said. I managed a small smile, receiving another hug and a kiss on the cheek in return. "I'm sorry, but I have to get ready for work," she said. Leaving the bathroom, she proceeded with her usual shower routine, perhaps just to keep up appearances. After she left for work, I continued sending out job applications, expanding my search parameters while forming my simple plan. Later that evening, I enjoyed a wonderful dinner and spent some quality time playing with the kids before putting them to bed. When Beth came home, I shared some fabricated good news with her. "Beth, remember that interview from a few days ago? They've asked me to come in for a second interview tomorrow morning." She hugged me, saying, "That's great news. I hope everything goes well tomorrow." "I'm sure it will," I replied, though not in the way either of us expected. The next morning, I woke up, showered, and got ready as if I were really heading to that second interview. Beth was already up, making me breakfast and wishing me luck. Afterward, I went back to our room to finish getting dressed, finding myself alone. Quietly, I pulled back a corner of the curtain, allowing a small view outside. With a goodbye kiss from Beth, I left the house. Instead of going to Kitchener as before, I returned home after dropping the kids off at daycare, discreetly parking around the corner. I walked back to the house, spotting a familiar car in the driveway. I immediately recognized it as belonging to her ex-boyfriend, Bill. They had been high school sweethearts but broke up when he started working at his father's auto shop while she went to university in Toronto. Bill had since married, even having 3 kids with his wife, who happened to be a friend of Beth's, once she got pregnant during my wife's 3rd year of college. Beth had even been a bridesmaid at their wedding, but all of this was before I met her. I knew Bill well enough. We met a couple of times a year. He now runs his father's auto shop after his father retired following a heart attack. I quietly entered through the back of our apartment complex. Our unit was on the 2nd floor, and I could hear the unmistakable sounds of pleasure coming from the bedroom. I quickly turned on my phone camera and started recording, using a nearby picnic table to position myself and get a clear view through the window. Conscious of the risk of being discovered by her or a curious neighbor, my goal was to capture only the essentials, their faces. Luck was on my side when they shifted positions, giving me what I needed. I then quietly retreated to my car and drove across town to reflect at a coffee shop. It was clear that hiring a divorce attorney was now the priority. Fortunately, with Bet working in the afternoon, I had enough time to make some calls, but Bill wouldn't escape the consequences of tearing apart my family. While sipping my coffee, I decided to do some digging on Bill. Opening his Facebook page, I found little information, so I checked his wife's page instead. She seemed to document every moment of their lives. As I scrolled through her posts and pictures, the situation worsened. Their oldest daughter had just turned 9, and Bill's wife had posted a series of photos showing her at different ages. At 3 years old, Bill's daughter looked eerily like mine. How long had Bet been with him? Were the kids even mine? I slammed my fist on the table, drawing stares from other customers. Murmuring an apology, I paid my bill and left. Bet would be waiting for me at home. When I got there, I composed myself. When she asked about the job, I lied, saying I didn't get it. It was the easiest way to hide my true feelings at that moment. I stayed hidden in my office while she got ready for work. Just before she left, she poked her head in and assured me, "Don't worry, it'll work out next time." I forced a smile, got up from my seat, and hugged her. Keeping up appearances was crucial. Once she left, I dialed the number of a friend, a divorce lawyer I knew from college. He had been admitted to the bar just 2 years ago, driven by the mistreatment his mother had faced during her divorce proceedings. Outraged by his father's infidelity, he was determined to help others in similar situations. "Jim, I need your services. Can you meet with me today?" I asked when I reached him by phone. "Are you sure?" he asked. "I am, and have proof," I replied. "Understood. I'm sorry to hear that." "I have an opening at 1:30, he said. I arrived at Jim's office at 1:30. We sat down and got straight to the point. "Francis, I'm sorry we have to meet under these circumstances." "Are you certain?" he asked. I remained silent and pulled out my phone, playing the video for him. "Okay. Are you sure?" he asked again. "Do you have any idea how long this has been going on?" I then shared with him what I had discovered on Facebook. "Do you know how I can verify if the kids are mine?" I asked. "Unfortunately, I've handled a similar case before where a paternity test was required. The test itself isn't complicated, but for legal purposes, the sample collection must be witnessed," he explained. I paused briefly, considering the situation, and realizing it was Friday, I suggested, "Could you be available to test them, say, next Wednesday?" "Sure, that works." "You'll still be picking up the kids from daycare while she's at work, right?" he asked. "Yes," I confirmed. "Why don't you bring the kids to my house for dinner? They can play with my son, and we can arrange to take the samples while we're there," he suggested. "That sounds like a plan." "You'll put my mind at ease," I said. "Don't worry, I'll take care of everything for you." DNA results usually take about 5 to 7 business days, so we'll have to wait a couple of weeks for that. In Ontario, divorces can't be finalized until you've lived apart for at least a year, but there are exceptions for circumstances like adultery. "I'll push for an exemption based on that," he advised. I nodded in agreement. "Additionally, regarding finances, you've been incredibly supportive over the years. We'll handle that, and you won't need to make any repayments until we've sorted everything out." "Thanks, I appreciate that," I responded. We shook hands, and I left. Continuing my day, I decided to visit an urgent care clinic. I wanted to confirm my STD status, given the circumstances. When you're in a tough situation but have a plan of action, it's manageable. But waiting can be a different story. Fortunately, the kids kept me busy over the weekend, and it seemed the last bit of intimacy had kept Bet satisfied for now. The thought that the kids might not be mine saddened me. That was the hardest part. But if they weren't mine, Bet's betrayal would be unforgivable, and I would have to move on. My concern now was getting through Monday and Tuesday when Bet was off work. I thought it would be a good idea to take some day trips to keep myself distracted and perhaps explore more of our relationship with Bet. On Monday, we visited a nearby animal safari where baboons tried to steal the car's side mirrors. Then on Tuesday, we went to a water park. The best part was that we were all too tired for anything extra afterward. Wednesday arrived, and Bet returned to work. It seemed she had a renewed hunger for intimacy, as she tried to initiate something that morning after dropping off the kids. I pretended to be depressed and explained that I wasn't in the mood due to the lack of job prospects lately, though what truly bothered me was my suspicion of her infidelity. I mentioned that Jim had called, concerned about my job loss, and had invited me to dinner. I felt it was important to be transparent with Bet in case Belinda mentioned something. I decided to spend the day with the kids. Regardless of their paternity, I cared for them, and I would continue being their father until told otherwise. I received a call from the clinic confirming that, for now, I was free of STDs. I needed to keep up appearances, so as long as we used protection, I saw no harm in occasional intimacy. That evening, after dinner, Jim's associates arrived. George cooperated without giving anything away, and we managed to collect his sample without Belinda noticing. For her, we devised a small distraction. We indulged in ice cream, and I jokingly suggested that a cotton swab was better than a spoon for eating ice cream. She found the idea amusing, so we both used cotton swabs to scoop up some ice cream and then lick them. We handed our swabs to Uncle Jim, who passed them to his associates. One of them would analyze the swabs the next morning. Belinda dismissed the game as nonsense, firmly believing that spoons were far superior. With the samples collected, all that was left was to wait a week or so for the results. During the following week, I continued looking for another job but didn't pass any interviews. I maintained a relationship with Bet, but we limited our activities to intimacy, avoiding anything deeper. Even though she sometimes got upset, I refused to do things that didn't sit well with me. On Friday morning, Jim called and asked me to come to his office. I arrived at noon and found my friend Jerry already there, which I found ominous. "Francis, the DNA test results have come in," Jim began solemnly. "They confirm that, while the children share the same father, it's not you." I couldn't contain my emotions and covered my face with my hands, tears streaming down my cheeks. Jerry sat beside me, offering his support. "Francis, I'm so sorry," he said. After a brief pause, I straightened up and wiped the last traces of tears from my eyes. I had been anticipating this outcome for a while, having thought about various scenarios over the past few weeks. "So, what now?" I asked. Jim, sensing where this was headed, said, "I assume you're considering filing, right?" I glanced at Jerry, who gave me a silent nod of approval. "Absolutely. However, I've had enough time to think. We can start the divorce proceedings without mentioning the adultery or the kids initially, then amend the filing later to include those details," I explained. "Certainly, but why?" Jim asked. "I want to catch her off guard. My plan is to hit her first with the divorce, then later with the revelation of the adultery and the paternity results," I explained further. "We can arrange that." "How would you like to proceed?" he asked. "Here's my plan," I began. Jerry kindly offered me his spare room if I needed a place to stay, but I assured him that I planned to remain at our own house. All our assets were in cash, totaling around $60,000, not counting retirement funds. With my new job, I would be earning about the same as Bet, so now that child support was no longer a concern, splitting our assets should be straightforward. However, I intended to be a bit clever about it. Jerry had taken the afternoon off to help me, probably thinking he'd just keep me company, but I had different plans. We went to some thrift stores to buy second-hand clothes, then returned to my house. We began organizing my belongings, replacing some with the thrift store clothes I'd bought. I picked up some cheap suits to replace my usual work clothes. I set aside a few items for the weekend and a suit for Monday, intending to keep the appearance of the closets intact since she was working over the weekend. I hoped she wouldn't notice the change, fearing that an empty closet would give it away. I planned to pack more over the weekend, but the remaining items could easily fit in the trunk of my car, which I planned to do on Sunday before her return from work. Monday marked what I called Divorce Day. I informed Bet that I had secured another job interview, scheduled for Monday morning, anticipating that she'd be served at home around 10 a.m. I made sure to know the ringtone I had assigned her, George Michael's Freedom, and chose to ignore her calls, opting to deal with the messages later while I enjoyed a drink. I parked my car in the garage and closed the door as a precaution in case she came looking for me. After finishing moving the boxes to the guest room, Jim called me unexpectedly. "Jim, this call surprised me." "What's going on?" I asked with a laugh. I could hear him laughing as he replied, "For some reason, Bet has been flooding my phone with calls." I chuckled. "What did you tell her?" "Well, after calming her down, I advised her to get a lawyer and that her attorney should contact me. I won't be dealing with her directly. Everything will go through me," he explained. "Perfect. Let's give her some time to stew before arranging a meeting." "I want her to simmer for a while," I commented. With that, I ended the call. The subsequent calls came from her parents. I appreciated them, but I wanted all the facts before discussing their daughter's actions. Jerry called about an hour later to check on me, mentioning that Bet had reached out to him. He claimed ignorance of my whereabouts and acted surprised when she mentioned the divorce papers. "I should win an award for my performance," he joked. By Wednesday, her attorney had reached out to Jim, proposing a meeting for the following Monday. Jim asked me about the meeting's duration. After considering it, I opted for a shorter time frame since Monday was her day off, and I wanted to enjoy my weekend. So, I requested the meeting to be scheduled for Friday. Friday arrived, and the meeting was set for after lunch at Jim's office. I arrived early and had lunch with Jim to avoid running into Bet on the way. When she arrived, she looked terrible, perfect. Jim began speaking, but Bet interrupted. "Why?" I remained silent, sticking to our proposal. Then her attorney spoke up. "This proposal is worthless. Are you requesting spousal support?" Jim replied, "Only while Francis is unemployed, and then no spousal support for either party once he finds a job." Her attorney frowned. "And there's no mention of child support?" Jim looked at me and smiled. "Well, it's only fair that the children's father contributes to child support, isn't it?" he said. Her attorney looked confused and responded, "Well, yes." Bet's expression resembled that of someone bracing for a hard blow. "In that case, she should seek child support from the father," Jim stated calmly. "The father?" her attorney questioned. Bet looked as though she was about to faint, repeating the word "no" under her breath. Jim then pulled out additional documents and a USB drive. "We'll be amending the divorce filing," he announced, handing the USB and a piece of paper to her attorney. "First, to expedite the divorce process, citing adultery. There's compelling video evidence on that USB of Bet with her ex-boyfriend. Make sure to have popcorn ready when you watch it." Her attorney's expression shifted to one of shock, while Bet began crying. She tried to apologize, but Jim continued. Jim then produced another set of documents. The Second Amendment concerns child support. These are the results of the DNA test, which indicate that Francis is not the father of Bet's children. We can speculate on the identity of the father, but we'll leave that for his wife to figure out. Bet seemed to grasp the implication, as her tears stopped, and she asked, "What do you mean, Bill's wife?" "This is the climax," Jim explained. At this moment, someone is delivering a letter to Bill's wife, along with another USB containing the video and the DNA results. I've also included my contact information, offering legal representation. Bet's true colors came out when she tried to defend Bill, but Jim smiled. Ruining their marriage is inevitable. When Bill's father's health declined, he transferred ownership of the auto shop to Bill. From what I understand, Bill's wife manages the office and basically runs the business. My letter outlines my proposal for her to take over the shop. They don't have a prenup. Bet broke into tears again. Jim then looked at Bet's attorney. "Would you mind reviewing the documents I've provided? We can schedule another meeting early next week." He extended his hand, and Bet's attorney, still processing everything, shook it distractedly as she escorted Bet out of the office. Bet tried to say something to me, but I simply turned around and walked back into Jim's office. It took another month, but we eventually reached a settlement. I dropped the matter of spousal support, but ensured that Jim supervised the business finances during the divorce proceedings, preventing either party from embezzling funds. However, this significantly affected Bill's income, and he still had to make temporary spousal and child support payments without access to the business's finances. Inevitably, Bill moved in with Bet, but now she was solely responsible for rent and daycare expenses, quickly depleting her share of the house savings. Although my divorce was settled, it would take several more months to finalize. I still needed to secure a job. My severance package had lasted through the divorce process, but it was running out. Then, a call came. The woman who had interviewed me in Kitchener asked if I would be interested in relocating. They were opening a new branch in another province and wondered if I would like to join the team. It was the fresh start I had been hoping for. Jerry and his wife were supportive but saddened by my departure. I spent the next 2 weeks training in the Kitchener office before moving to Charlton. With all my belongings packed, I said goodbye to Jerry and drove by the old apartment one last time. I had heard that tensions at the auto shop had forced Bill to find other work until his divorce settlement was finalized. If his wife left him, he would have to pay even more spousal support. As I sat in my car, reflecting on what could have been, I witnessed Bill hurriedly leaving the apartment, with Bette chasing after him, throwing a shoe. It seemed she was enjoying her own version of paradise. Story 2. I, 33M, found out that my wife, 33F, of 5 years had been cheating on me with 2 different coworkers. My wife and I had a pretty standard marriage. We had our problems, but we always found ways to work through them. We had not been married long before the pandemic, and the constant isolation together brought up a lot of issues in our marriage that we hadn't really noticed before. We heard all over the news that the lockdown had caused a lot of divorces, and we didn't want to add our marriage to those statistics. We went to therapy to try to work through our problems, and we came out stronger on the other side. Or so I thought, and my wife had always been very career-focused. She would work extra late hours, weekends, and even go in on some holidays. She was close to making a partner at the law firm she worked at, and we knew that those sacrifices she was making would only pay off in the long run. So when she wasn't coming home from work until 8 o'clock in the evening, I didn't really think much of it because of her job and the confidentiality involved. When she would get phone calls, I was used to her stepping away into her office to take them. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary until I got an email from an anonymous source about my wife. The email suggested that my wife might have been involved with one of her coworkers. I didn't believe it at first. I actually almost wanted to go to her and tell her that somebody was spreading lies about her. But something told me to keep it to myself. I replied back asking for further clarification, but I got none. Honestly, I wondered if it was a disgruntled client trying to tear at the threads of her life. Even though I didn't believe it, the idea of it still played in the back of my mind. It's difficult to admit, but I was a little paranoid about it. One night shortly after I'd received the email, she texted me telling me that she would be in the office working on a case, and she didn't know when she would be back. Something in my brain tingled, connecting that text message to the email that I'd been sent. I needed to find out if the email was telling the truth. I didn't want my wife to know that I was suspicious of her, so I got some takeout and brought it to her office. Worst case scenario, I go in, and she's in the middle of some sexual act with her coworker. Best case, I go in, and she's knee-deep in paperwork and happy I brought her some dinner. When I got there, it almost seemed like she must have left already. All the lights were off, and there wasn't a soul in sight. I almost turned around and left, but then I heard the moaning. It was coming from down the hall, and I had to know if the email had been true. I walked down and saw my wife in her office with one of the partners of the law firm, and they were having sex. Now, my wife is an attorney and a great one at that. I knew right away that there was no forgiving her or pretending like this didn't happen. So, my only option was to leave, but going up against her, her word versus mine, would never work out. I ended up hiring a private investigator to follow her around and gather some evidence. When I hired him, I assumed that I would just be getting some pictures or some videos of her and the partner, and I definitely wasn't expecting to find out she was sleeping with another coworker. She had been cheating on me with 2 different coworkers. I had plenty of evidence, so I sought out a divorce attorney. They knew who my wife was right away. She was coming up in the community, and she made quite a name for herself. But they agreed to take the case. While my attorney was getting the paperwork together, I knew I needed to do something to enact my revenge on her. I found her employee manual in her office, scoured through it, and found some information that I definitely thought could help. Office romances were strictly forbidden. My wife was good friends with her boss, and there were a few times that he and I would get together to play golf. So, I reached out to him and asked if he wanted to go out. He agreed, and I met him at the country club during lunch. I told him everything. I showed him the evidence that I had. He was shocked that my wife would cheat on me with 2 different coworkers, and he was also appalled that they had so blatantly disregarded the company's rules on company property. Nonetheless, he told me that all 3 of them would be facing termination. When I got home, my wife asked me about how golf was. I told her everything and told her that we were going to be getting divorced. About an hour later, when she was begging me to forgive her, her boss called and told her he wanted to speak to her first thing in the morning. She was fired the next day. She swore up and down that I had messed with the wrong person, that she was going to take me for everything I had, and I would regret the day that I screwed her over. Luckily for me, my divorce attorney was very good at her job. Thanks to the evidence that the private eye that I hired was able to gather, I was able to divorce her without sacrificing any of my assets. I'm not going to lie, it's been difficult adjusting to a life without her. But I'm noticing now that a lot of the stressors in my life have gone away now that she is no longer in the picture. I'm looking forward to fully healing from this and getting myself back out there. Edit. I realized I didn't put this in the original text, but the person who sent the email was the wife of the partner that my wife had been sleeping with. Apparently, she found text messages between them and thought she should tell me about it. This story is full of complex emotions and dramatic twists. Infidelity in marriage always causes deep suffering, and a person's reaction to it can vary. In this case, the decision to divorce and take action against the former wife is understandable given the circumstances. It is important to strive for healing and to move forward, but it is also important to recognize that every experience can be a lesson for future relationships. Story 3. A decade ago, I, 43M, stood at the altar head over heels in love with my soon-to-be wife, 40F. As soon as we met, we fell for each other. We never wanted to be away from each other, and we both knew almost right away that we had finally found the person we were meant to be with. We only dated for 6 months before we eloped together. Our lives had been amazing since then. Both of our careers took off, we had 2 children together, and we bought a wonderful home in the suburbs. We had the picture-perfect life, that is, until it came crumbling down in front of us. She and I had always been transparent about the things going on in our personal lives, though we cherished our time apart to pursue our own personal interests. She had always been interested in things like pottery, art, and music, whereas I was pursuing a side hustle of making my own furniture. At the end of every day, we would climb into bed and tell each other what we did to fill the other in. In hindsight, she had left a lot of information out about what she was doing. It didn't strike me at the time, but when I would ask her about what she did, she would be vague compared to how she used to be, where she used to give me every detail of the pottery class she was taking. She was only telling me that they made pinch pots or they glazed the ceramics. She ended up taking a course at the local community college for business marketing because she and I had long been talking about creating our own home goods line. I would make the furniture, and she would make decor, vases, glassware, etc. This class was something that I was also very interested in because of the prospect of it helping us later down the line. When I asked her for some of the details and to share some of the notes she had, she would get somewhat defensive and tell me that I didn't trust that she was doing a good enough job taking the course. That led to a huge argument between us, where she told me that I treated her like a child sometimes. I genuinely didn't know what she was talking about, but I promised her that I would try to work on whatever it was making me act that way. One thing that I did notice, but didn't think much about, was she would get phone calls and excuse herself to answer them. Sometimes she would get text messages, and she would tilt her phone away from me or lay down on the couch in the opposite direction so I couldn't see what she was texting. Not that I normally peered over her shoulder to read what it was, but it was the extra effort to hide it that was a clear sign of something wrong. I just wished that I'd realized that at the time. It all came to a head when my wife rushed into the shower after spilling coffee all over herself one morning. She was upset, frustrated, and worried about being late for work, so she didn't bring her phone in like she normally did. Normally, she would bring it in and play music from the speaker while she showered. She left it sitting on the kitchen table, and I didn't think anything of it until a call came through from her professor. I was very curious about why he was calling her. Granted, it had been years since I had been in college, but when I was in school, if a professor needed to get in contact with us, they would email us. The phone call ended, and I let my curiosity get the better of me. I opened up her phone while she was still in the shower and looked at their contact history. There had been dozens of calls between the both of them, some lasting as long as 45 minutes, and some were video calls too. Immediately, I had a terrible feeling about what I would find in the text messages, but despite my better judgment, I opened them anyway. They had both been exchanging explicit, graphic text messages between each other alongside pictures. My heart shattered when I saw everything. At the time, that was the first sign of anything going on that I picked up on. I was completely blindsided by the news. How could my wife have done that to me? How could she have betrayed our entire family? I could still hear the shower running, but I knew I only had a few minutes to figure out what I wanted to do with that information. At the very least, I knew I wanted to get him fired. If I confronted my wife about it right then, she likely would have deleted the evidence, and I would have had nothing to show the school. I ended up screenshotting some of the more explicit parts, as well as some of the pictures they had exchanged, then texted them to myself. After I did that, I deleted the screenshots and the text messages between us before my wife got out of the shower. I yelled through the door that I had to leave to go into work a little bit early. I simply could not look at her after what I saw. I ended up taking the day off work and spending it near the docks, watching the seagulls over the water. During that time, I figured out how I wanted to go about this. My wife had been dying to get all of our friends and some of our family together for a potluck dinner, so I decided to make that happen. Most of our friends were people that we knew through my work, and my wife was very close to my sister and her husband. I knew if I wanted to hurt her back, it would be by tarnishing her relationships with these people. The day of the dinner, I scheduled a meeting with the dean of the college my wife had been taking the course at. While I was there, I showed her all of the details about how a professor was sleeping with a student and exchanging very inappropriate messages. I showed her the evidence, and the dean made it seem like this wasn't the first time there had been a complaint about that specific professor. She promised to make sure the proper actions were taken to terminate him. This time, when the potluck eventually rolled around and all of our friends walked into our home with their dishes, everything seemed normal. I had planned on making a toast to everyone, then telling them about the impending divorce between my wife and me. But fate had another plan in mind. The professor stormed over to the house, banging on the door. I answered it, and he pushed past me and rushed over to my wife to yell at her. He demanded to know why she told the dean about their relationship. Everyone else in the room watched completely stunned. I spoke up and told him that I was the one who told the dean. My wife looked at me in complete shock. I told her that I found her text messages, and the dinner was my official announcement of our separation. The professor was so upset with me for costing him his job that he lunged across the table at me to attack. I am much larger than him. I work out regularly, so I was able to subdue him quite easily. However, I was definitely keen on pressing charges on top of getting him fired. In the end, my wife practically begged for my forgiveness because she realized how crazy the professor was. However, I had absolutely no interest in forgiving her. For our children's sake, I would be amicable and try to make sure the divorce wasn't messy, but there is no chance she and I will be together again. The story reflects the complexity and pain of human relationships and the consequences of betrayal, showing how emotional reactions can lead to dramatic and far-reaching consequences for all involved.